introduce.
All right, so it's telling me that it's recording right now, which is awesome.
Sure.
So this is for Facebook and YouTube for the church family. So I'm just going to kick things off and just let the church family know. We had this idea a few weeks ago of talking to some of our supported missionaries. And so I wanted to talk to Dale and Carol Smith here. And they have a really fascinating story that they can share with us today. So how about I'll just start off. Can you guys introduce yourselves? Let us know who you are and what you're all about.
Sure. We're Dale and Carol Smith. We serve with InterAct Ministries. We've been in ministry in Alaska and Canada since 1980. And right now, we're working in administrative roles, and it allows and actually requires us to travel to visit our missionaries in various places. We'll talk more about that in a little while. But we are one of those rare people who are privileged to be sent out by two local churches. We have been sent out, members of and sent out by Crossfield Baptist Church. That is our home church, but we're also sent out by Salem Baptist Church in North Carolina. That's where we came from, and they still consider us part of their church body and missionary family. So we are just plain old people, but we have some things we'll share with you. Carol, she can speak. I mean, she...
No doubt I can speak.
I am not a misogynist.
Absolutely. Hey, that's awesome. And I don't even know, how long have you guys been connected with Crossfield now?
Since 1995.
Yeah.
95. Awesome.
Yes, we joined in 95.
Longer than me.
Yeah.
A little bit of inside baseball here. Before we started recording, I was saying I've only been at the church since 2012. So, you know, if you mention anyone I don't know, you guys will have to forgive me, because I'm like, hey, I'm still pretty new here. So I'll make sure I ask those questions as we go here. But something I've always found really cool about you guys is, yeah, you're in that administrative role, but you're not sitting in your office most days. I mean, you are mobile. You are moving around. What are the different places you bounce back and forth between Crossfield and where else?
Well, our house is in Crossfield, so we consider this our residence. But Dale also oversees the U.S. side of the organization.
Wait a minute. Old people like to interrupt each other and correct each other. So she said our house is in Crossfield.
Oh, I'm
Technically,
sorry.
We're in Carstairs. This is what old people do.
Yeah. Yes, we live in Carstairs, but we travel so much, and Dale's oversees the office in Oregon, the U.S. side of the organization, and plus we travel to Alaska and to Siberia, and then across parts of Western Canada where InterAct serves. So that's the most of it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know you guys probably get the more frequent flyer miles than anyone I know. And I know some guys who travel a lot for their jobs as well. So that's saying something. So yeah, it's always a privilege whenever you guys are here at the church. Awesome to catch up on what's happening. And it's funny that right now you are in Canada, kind of, hopefully I can say this okay. You're stuck here. Though I'm sure you still love
Darryl, this is home. Come on.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, but I think you do like being here. I know you do, absolutely. So a few months ago, and this is really why I want to talk with you guys, to hear some of your story. So a few months ago, you guys had traveled to Russia. So I'm curious, where in Russia were you guys, and what were you doing there?
Well, I'll kick off here and just give you an introduction. Carol did all the work in setting our trips up, so it's really unfair that I do this. She books the flights and books the motels and all the rest, and I just get to tell all that we're going to do. We had normally what we do when we go to Siberia, which is where our staff are, and we'll fill you in a little bit more about that when we talk about why we're there. But we have staff in Siberia, and so that's the eastern part of Russia. And it's where they used to send political prisoners, and you know, it was pretty inhospitable. You wouldn't want to be there. It was nowhere, the wastelands. But now there are cities and towns, there's villages all over, there's indigenous peoples there. But we plan to go every year to visit during the time of our field conference. So our missionaries that are working in Siberia, we go and we're part of a field conference with them to encourage them, to hear what's going on, to meet the people, spend some time with the people that they work with who have become friends of ours. But normally it's so exhausting that we like to book a couple days on the front side of the trip and a couple days on the back side of the trip. And I was picking up this part of the story because I wanted to tell you where we were supposed to be. We booked our flights to go through Rome, Italy on our way to
March 9th.
just when COVID-19 hit. And we're scheduled to go through Rome. And we're thinking, I had told, I'm taking Carol to Italy for her 65th birthday. We were going to be in Rome. She'd wake up in Rome on her 65th birthday. But unfortunately, had we followed through on that, we probably would still be in Rome, maybe till her 66.
So you guys never made it to Rome then?
Okay,
No.
I'm passing the baton to Carol. Let her tell you how she worked all this out. She worked her magic.
Yes, well,
with God's help.
With God's help, absolutely. We were deciding whether we would go or not. Should we even make this trip? But our staff in Siberia live a very hard life. It's not that they don't have the amenities. It's not that they don't live in apartments with electricity, etc. But it's a very lonely place for them. They're spread out, and Russia is actually can be a lovely country in many ways, but it is a very complicated place to live. And I could give you stories, but I'll pass on those. It's just life is complicated. So we felt like we needed to go, and at that point, the only hot spot was Europe. So I totally rebooked our trip and decided that we would go directly to Moscow, which would like from New York City to Moscow, so that we would not have to go through Europe at all. And landing in Moscow, they would allow us to come in. Had we gone through Europe, we could not have gone in. Right. So I totally rebooked the flight, and we got there. And in the process,
way, Moscow is not all that close to where we're going to end up. We still had about 8 time zones to go.
Right. So
Russia's a big country, so when you're in Moscow, you could be still pretty far away.
Huge, right? Yeah. So we always break up the trip because it's about a 45-hour travel. And it just wears you down, and then you start exhausted and then you're end exhausted. But this time we had no choice, and because of the whole way that it had turned out, we shortened our trip by about 4 days. Now that's going to end up being incredibly significant when we talk about our escape from Siberia. But God knew that, and we didn't. It was amazing how it all turned out. So we did the trip. We flew through New York City directly into Moscow, and then we flew into a couple of Siberian cities and made our way there and arrived very exhausted, but very thankful.
I bet. When you actually got to where you were going in Siberia, so you had a sense when you were there that something was going on in Europe then?
Yeah, we kept up. I mean, we had Wi-Fi and we knew what was going on in the rest of the world, but it didn't.
But these were pretty early days, though, right? Like this was
not too early. March 6th, they were shutting down Europe.
Italy, Spain.
Yeah,
it was hot and heavy. You couldn't go to northern Italy then. If we'd have gone to Rome, it was right after we would have been there. They shut down Rome even. So it was. But where we were on the backside of Lake Baikal. And here, this interesting piece, if you ever study geography, Lake Baikal is a lake that doesn't look that big, but it's the deepest in the world. And it has 20% of the world's fresh water. So, but there's a lot of resorts out there, and that's where it's really cheap to go to a resort in Siberia, trust me.
At that time of year.
There's a reason for that.
Well, yeah.
So our mission family there, we were going to meet at this resort in Lake Baikal. And, there in this community, Ulan-Ude, near this resort, you'd know what's going on in the outside world, but nobody was pretty much nobody was wearing masks, or, they were aware, but That was it.
Yeah, Russia was one of the later countries to start having cases. And about 3 days after we left, the first case in the city where we had landed surfaced. Yeah, so
First known case.
first known case. Moscow, St. Petersburg, those areas had more. So we felt quite safe to be there. And every day we were just keeping up with the news that was coming out. And we were also on the travel program for the US and Canada so that we would be alerted if there was anything we needed to know.
So I know for some people, going to Russia, going to Siberia would be a challenge at the best of times. And you guys have gone there on numerous occasions, so you were quite used to it, I'm sure. But I'll just kind of interrupt your story at this point and just ask, like any regrets of choosing to go out there at that time, even when you heard like some stuff were happening in Europe, do you still feel like that was the right call for you to head out there?
Absolutely. I was a little apprehensive on the front side thinking, I mean, just, okay, should we even do this? Is this the smartest thing to do? And we prayed about it and just felt clearly that God wanted us to pursue and go for it. And we haven't quite gotten used to going to Siberia. I don't think it ever gets easier, Darryl, just so you know. It is still Siberia, and the travel, living there, getting around there, it's a different world. You've got all kinds of different experiences.
We love the people, the indigenous people, the tribal people that InterAct works with. We have just fallen in love with them. And we, of course, we love our missionaries, but it is never, for us, it's never intriguing, exciting. It's a lot. Yeah, it's hard work.
Yeah. When we get there, we feel like God planned for us to be there. We had another missionary who was going to be speaking at our conference, and at the last minute he got sick and he couldn't come. So we were supposed to meet him in Moscow and take him on over with us. Didn't work out. So all of a sudden we didn't have a speaker for conference. And, it just challenges. It's normal over there. But one of the things, I'm going to let Carol tell you about getting registered.
Yeah.
Russia as a whole keeps close control on everything. It's the former Soviet days, you heard about that. You don't realize that now in this era, it's still, you never know who's listening, where there's somebody listening. You have your papers with you. You have a lot, it's very well controlled. It's not a scary thing. It's just
tedious.
It's different than the way we live here. Yeah.
So when you're in Russia, they want to know always where every person is. Like if you're traveling there, you have a registration paper at the airport. They give you this paper, and within 3 days, you have to register in the area where you're going to be staying. So, and if you're going to go somewhere else, you have to register, at weekly intervals. And this is a very long story that I will try to condense. But
it's a COVID-19 story in the middle of it, though, really.
Yes, it was. So we got registered the first day. We actually stayed at a hotel the first day instead of with our missionaries because we had traveled for 46 hours and it was daytime and there was a kid at the house. So we decided we would sleep through the day in a hotel and they would do our registration. But you only have 3 days then to actually get the greater registration. Well, I think, it's actually a week. So we started.
You might want to tell them, define what a hotel or a motel is there.
I don't want to be.
Never mind. Okay.
Yeah.
It's less luxurious than you might expect here.
Yeah, this is,
it's more Spartan. Just leave it at that.
There are limits of what we would like to say and be, just what we want to cover. So to be honoring of the people who were really gracious to us. So yeah, so we had to go to get a registration, and we went to the first office that usually the post office can register you, and it's always nope, we can't do this here. You don't have this right thing. You have to go to that building over on whatever, So we go the next day. I mean, these all take time. Certain hours, they're open. So we go to the next day we head to the other building, and they're in this stuffed hallway, there are maybe 30 to 40 people just crammed in this hallway. Everybody that is in that hallway has arrived in Russia from other countries within the last week, because they only have a week to get registered.
Oh,
So
wow.
we sit for 3 to 4 hours in this stuffy hallway
Or stand.
or stand, whether, and so we wait there for 4 hours and we get in, and the lady looks at our paperwork and says, I can't do this.
Before you even go beyond that, people there were from all countries all over, Asian countries, and they're coughing and hacking,
Yes.
and there is no social distancing is in millimeters instead of meters. You're all crammed into this little hallway.
And it's interesting when you tell stories like that now, because I think, and it's so interesting how quickly we've accommodated to this 6 feet apart idea. Is when you tell a story like that, already in my mind, I'm thinking too close. No, you guys have to be further apart. And I think my personal bubble has already been a little bit bigger than most people. And even now, you got to be further apart. But now you're telling the story of you guys are, Dale, you said it well there. It's not measured in feet, it's measured in centimeters or millimeters.
Probably millimeters, because you are shoulder to shoulder. I mean, this is crammed in because they don't give out numbers, and you have to watch who was in front of you, who came in. And if you get missed, everybody else knows who was in front of them. So you've got to kind of work your way. You're not just sitting there reading a book. You're watching what is happening so that you know when your turn shows up. So we get in, and the lady at the desk is like, nope, I can't do this here. You're going to have to go get a different person that has a different kind of qualifications, and you have to go to this other office. So the next day we get the Buryat pastor, who had to spend like 2 hours looking for the deed to his house. He had to have the deed to his house. And we went and we stood in line for a couple of hours at this place. And we got up, and the lady says, nope, you can't register here. Now, we're the day before we're supposed to be registered again, and we're going to be taking a trip. So it's pretty critical. And he's like, I've registered people here before. Nope, you cannot do it here. This is not right. You don't have the right paper. So we left there, and we were like, well, where do we go now? I don't know, she says. You can't do it here. So we have done the circle of every possibility that we could be registered. And finally we said, the Lord goes like, go back to the hotel and spend the night, because hotels can register you. So after all of that work, we went back and spent another night in the hotel. But that is life in Russia, and that's what our missionaries experience all the time, to get medical help, to get their paperwork done, to rent an apartment. Everything they do is like that.
3 days and 2 motel stays, all because we couldn't get registered for that week. So much time wasted. It's frustration on frustration.
That sounds like a grueling process, and I can see why you guys going there, and correct me if I'm wrong, it really sounds like a big part of your role is ministering to the missionaries there, and being a source of encouragement, because just hearing that story is exhausting to me. Like all the steps you had to do that we just don't experience here in Canada. Really, it's making me feel very blessed that the bureaucracy we live through here, in a lot of ways, is a lot less than what they're going through in that part of the world.
Yeah, well, you're right. And our primary reason for going was to be an encouragement to them. That's why we go. And sometimes God expands that. This was one of those trips where he did. But we go because our missionaries, they know us, they trust us, they share life with us.
We're grandma and grandpa to their kids.
The kids hug us and love us, and we bring them presents, of course. We're like grandma and grandpa, so we earn it a little bit. But it was amazing, this trip, how God intended for us to be there. It was so clear. We didn't have any idea how much interaction we were going to have, because we've been back again and again in different cities. we've gotten to know the national believers. And this particular place where we were most of our time, the city of Ulan-Ude, it's made up of about half Russians and half Buryat. Buryat people are an unreached people group, 450,000, and there are a handful of believers, and those believers primarily live in that city of Ulan-Ude. There's a church that we are partner with or work with. It wasn't started by our organization, it was started by another mission organization who left. And we get a chance to come along. Some of our missionaries are still there. We know the pastors. There were 3 pastors. We have a great chance to invest in their lives, encourage them. So it's not just going over to encourage our missionaries anymore. It's coming alongside the national believers and having a chance to share life. They love Christians from the West coming and seeing and hearing what's happening with believers in another part of the world. And so just our presence is exciting and encouraging to them.
They're primarily young in years, young compared to us, and young,
like your age.
Yeah, and young in their faith. In some ways, they're very well taught. Some of them have been to seminary in other parts of Siberia, but none of them grew up in a Christian home. None of them know what it means to be a Christian parent. How do you do this? How do you discipline your kids? How do you teach them the values? And that was one of the things that they asked. They asked Dale to speak, but they wanted him to speak primarily in church on like Christian families. And then they wanted us to do a 2-hour session just talking about how do you raise children to love Jesus, when they grow up. And they have never seen the model, and they don't know what to do about it. So those were opportunities that we had multiplied times, but particularly in those meetings.
Yeah, that first meeting, the first Sunday we were there, I was asked 2 days before if I'd preach. And of course, have to come up with something that's going to be for that audience, and you're digging, and it's Panic City. You're no books to study with. Anything you've got's got to be what's on your Kindle or whatever. But God, it was God. I felt very clearly. God said, I put you here. I set you up. You're supposed to speak. It's not about whether you look like an idiot or not. You get up there, and I'm going to use you. And it was good to be there, and it was really good to have the 2 hours after the service. The whole church, all the adults stayed because they wanted to hear, okay, how do we raise kids to follow Jesus? They've seen the people they've seen who were Christians. There's many wayward kids, and they didn't want that. So that was a great encouragement. Knowing these pastors, we pray for these 3 young men who are pastors, and just exciting. In fact, God arranged so we couldn't get a registration. One of those pastors we spent a couple hours with, standing there talking there in one of the bureaucratic offices, and it was, again, God set us up again and again and again.
And I think that this is a great example of why you guys are doing what you're doing. It's not just over a Zoom call like that. It's a great example of what I would call incarnational ministry, physically being there with them, doing things that just couldn't happen. And so if anyone would wonder, boy, you guys are traveling, you're going different places. Why? You could just send an email or a phone call. And I think right now in the world that we're living in, just hearing that, I'm feeling it again in my heart of, man, I'm just missing being around people, having those types of interactions. And I'm sure those missionaries, that area, really blessed by your time there. And so I kind of want to shift our conversation from what you were doing there to, and I find this part of your story fascinating. I read your email of how you got back. So can you kind of walk us through how did you get back to, first of all, to the States, and then to Canada, and how did you see God just working through all those steps?
I'll let Carol tell that part of the story, but before we go there, you alluded to the Zoom meetings, and it's not incarnational, not flesh and blood. you lose so much when you don't have that. But because we do that occasionally, we have relationship and voice because we're there physically.
Mhm.
Carol spent hours on the phone last night in Siberia. Of course, it was in the morning over there last night. And this morning, she was in Siberia talking with somebody else, both by Zoom. So it's because of it, the investment face to face and person to person, real flesh, that we have the opportunity to do this.
Yes.
I know you, Darryl, and I trust you because we've spent time together. If we'd only known each other this way, it would be different. So yeah, it is worth the travel.
Yes.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good point too, what you brought up. Of this is a great tool, like that we can do this through the internet. I was joking with you guys again before we hit record here of how the internet is not a fad; it is here to stay. I'm sorry to tell everyone that. Someone posted online the other day about doing ministry online. What if the internet breaks? And someone said, I think we'll have bigger problems in the world at that point. But it's true. Without this, it can work together of doing it online and in person. And so that's awesome that you are still connected to those missionaries, even right now, just a phone call, and you get to really speak into their lives that way as well. It's a great tool to use as well. So yeah. Anyway, so let me know, how did you get back here? What happened?
Hey, you know what? If you hadn't known the struggles, we would have said it went so seamlessly. But the truth of the matter is, it was like walking through the briar patch, and God just kept pulling back and allowing us step by step just to keep going. And part of this story may make some people feel uncomfortable because they're like, what? You did what? But this is, we're just going to go with it, right? Here we are.
So don't say anything that gets you in too much trouble. Okay.
No, it won't get us in trouble. It won't get us in trouble, but it might make some people, you know, the eyebrow raising at this point. But about 4 days before we were scheduled to fly out, we received a notification from the U.S. Embassy. See, we had flown out of Portland, Oregon, but we are actually residents of Canada. So we're dual citizens. So we have both countries, you know, sending us information. So about 4 days before our last flight, or maybe 5, we had received a notification that all Americans have been called home. And if you are planning to come back to the States, you need to do it now, or you need to plan to stay indefinitely. So we were like, if we try to switch all of our flights out of Siberia, we're like taking the puddle jumper to one place and then staying overnight. You know, it's not going to work anyway. We will not get there any faster because there's no way to rearrange that from here at this point. But then we got a notification from the Prime Minister of Canada that, okay, all Canadians need to come home. And then it came down to Alberta. And if you don't get back to Alberta by a certain date, all the health care is, you will have no health care anywhere. So just so you know, your travel insurance will not work if your Alberta health care is not functioning. So we saw the deadlines looming in front of us. And we prayed about it. And that's when we first sent out a letter to our primary prayer team. And we said, we need prayer. We do not know what to do. We could get on a train and it would take a week to get to Moscow. So, you know, it just was, we were feeling like we can't go and we can't not go. So at that point, we got our prayer warriors on board and made the decision that because our flights were already booked and it was going to be 5 more days, we would wait until that time. So we just kept getting the notifications from the different countries. So I don't know if you want to step in at any spot here, but
I will say I got one of those emails telling me where you guys were at and the difficulties of getting back to Canada. and I just turned to Steph. And I'm like, we gotta pray for Dale and Carol here. We want to see them back here in Canada. And so I started following. Honestly, at that point, I didn't know where you were in the world. I'm like, I'm not sure where you guys are at. And so you're in Siberia, and started praying. And I just found it really awesome that you clued us into what was happening, right?
Yes.
So we could start praying with you all the way through your journey.
Yes. Well,
Wow.
cool. Well, that was probably the thing that the takeaway that I could jump ahead, but I'll let Dale do that. In terms of knowing that people were praying for us was absolutely incredible. We had a sense of we have to make a plan or we have to do something. We had no sense of anxiety. It was just God has placed us here right now. We better do what we're supposed to do here today. Let me take this moment to do what God is allowing us to do. And we just did not feel fear. It wasn't, there wasn't there wasn't illness. There was in the western part of Russia, but in the eastern part in Siberia, there really wasn't a lot of fear yet involved there. So we just kept doing what we were supposed to do. So we got up to the day before, and this is the part that may make people a tad uncomfortable. Now, we have been living in Ulan-Ude, and in Russia, the cities all have a central heating system. They have these huge coal plants that have billowing clouds of coal dust, and they send hot water out to the apartment buildings and the office buildings. Everything is heated by these central heating systems. It's a very unusual, like if you have a little house somewhere, that's different, but all of the apartment buildings and everything come from central heating. So it's a very dirty environment, a lot of coal dust, and it tends to irritate your respiratory system, even if you don't have problems normally. So the day before we were supposed to go, Dale said, before it was okay, it was like 24 hours before we were supposed to leave. Dale's like, I think I'm running a fever. I'm not feeling well. And he said,
Friday morning, and we're supposed to leave Saturday afternoon.
So we were like, no way, like you cannot go. We cannot travel with a fever, even if you chose to do that, besides being unfair to people. And then the issue of getting stuck in an airport along the way and having to quarantine. It's just not. And so we didn't have symptoms that they were
at that time. That time they were saying a high fever. I was below 100 Fahrenheit, so I didn't meet the qualifications anyway.
And he didn't have a cough, and there were just he didn't have any of the things. And at that point, they said these are the symptoms, But we knew if he had a fever, we would not be able to travel. So I am not normally as bold as to say, God, this fever needs to be gone. And we prayed together with our missionaries. I mean, we literally just sat down and said, Lord, we know you heal. And we know that you have your purposes in this. If we need to stay here, this fever is our sign that we need to stay. And if we are supposed to go, there can't be any fever ahead of our departure.
Before we go on to the rest of the fever part, it was great. It's nice to be encouraged and to be loved. Our missionaries were fighting over who we were going to stay with if we were stuck there for the next 3 months. they wanted us. That was great.
Yeah, we were so thankful. Yeah, there were 2 families there, and Dale was back in the bedroom, really just praying and thinking, well, what's going on? And I heard them over there saying, well, if they stay, will they go back to Krasnoyarsk with us on the train? No, I think they should stay here. They shouldn't be traveling anymore. They should stay right here in Ulan-Ude. So
well, that's good to know you had a place to stay.
Yeah, we did have a place to stay. So anyway, we went through the night. Dale the next morning was not feeling worse, but we had not ever actually taken his temperature. And so at like, we were supposed to leave for the airport at 5 p.m. At 3 p.m., he's not sure. He's just sitting there in the bedroom thinking, should we go or should we not go? And so
My concern wasn't for us being stuck. My concern was, do I have something that
Right.
I'm going to transmit to anybody else?
Right.
I didn't want to.
Reminder that we had been in the room in close proximity to people who had arrived home from all over the world in the last week, right?
And coughing and breathing and
Yes.
sneezing and yeah.
So we're trying to think, what do we do here? And so we just sat down on the bed and we just prayed and said, Lord, you know where we need to be and what that's going to include. And if Dale has a fever, we are just going to accept it from you that we're going to stay here. And we found a thermometer and took his temp, and I'm telling you, he was below.
I wasn't even up to a normal temperature. So we said, okay.
The bags were already packed. We called the taxi and headed to the first airport.
That's
So, I mean, then it's a very long story along the way. The only other two big parts of that, we had 5 different airports that we went through, but the biggest one would have been that in Moscow, we were getting ready to get on the flight and discovered that we were on the flight that the consulate and embassy staff were leaving Russia with us.
The U.S. consulate staff
U.S.
had been
consulate
sent
staff.
home.
Wow.
So then we got to New York City, which we had no choice. We had to go through New York City. And by that time, New York had been shut down virtually. It was a literal ghost town, except for the few people who had like plastic ponchos and duct tape
around
their wrist and mask and everything, who were flying from the international terminal.
Shields and face masks and rubber gloves. It was full hazmat, and that's
homemade hazmat.
I know you guys never actually went to Italy, but you were really in some of the toughest or the hardest hit areas from New York, not Italy, but if you had gone there, that would have been one of the toughest spots. And even Moscow, again, another major part of the world. And so it's amazing that you were able to get through. And it's interesting, even at that point, these airports were like really, it was a very few passengers at that point, very few planes were going through.
Oh, right. They'd already shut down flights. Absolutely. They were less and less. Flights were going out. Moscow, we'd never seen anything like this. It was vacant. One place we were going up the escalators, the International Hall, nobody. It was just empty. And we found out later, these airports, that once we'd gone through them, within 2 days, they closed down behind us. So
they closed down international flights.
Like within 24 to 48 hours, they'd shut down. So we were just ahead of the wave. I wonder if God knew.
Yeah. So that's about the prayer. We were going to
go ahead.
Well, that was the thing. I think the biggest thing that, it sounds like an adventure story and everybody loves the adventure story, and it really isn't ministry. It is part of ministry. But what we were able to see there was the hand of God and the prayer of the people. Yes. We had so many people. And the interesting thing is, you sense that at those times when there are crises, and it might be an illness in your family, it might be anything, right? But at that moment, we knew we were being prayed for. Not only were we receiving emails, but it was just this cushion carrying us, not a delayed flight. That never happens when there's not a problem.
Right.
Yes.
And we know we have missionary friends who were stuck and are stuck. Our own kids in Niger, West Africa, they're there for the count, But it's just amazing. But beyond that, having been people who have prayed for others, what that gave people an opportunity to do is to participate in missions.
And in what God is doing, and to see God. There's a lot of people who didn't see the same things we had a chance to experience. It's not that we're any better or different, but it was an opportunity for people to be involved and for God to respond. He says to pray. People rallied and prayed, and we appreciate it. But we appreciate him showing who he is, his awesomeness, and just allowing us to go seamlessly. 14 time zones, yeah, 5 airplanes,
5 airports, and then the drive back to Canada,
2
which
days of
also
drive.
worked out. It
Yeah.
just, the timing was all amazing. And then we had our 14 days where we couldn't leave home, and our missionary friends here bought groceries for us, took care of us, and
we call
and
it
we
our,
recovered. Oh, glorious.
we call it our coronacation.
Yes. And so you flew from, just to connect the dots a little bit more, so you flew from New York, and then from there to, was it to Portland?
Mm-hmm.
And then,
And then
from
Drove
did you
from
drive immediately up to Alberta?
well, it was the
2 days.
second day. There was a day in between. We got in, we needed to repack. We had all our stuff from there. We needed to get stuff to come home because we knew we were going to be here for a while. Well, we had stuff that we've been living in Oregon with, and we needed to get it loaded, get it in the car. So we turned around as quick as we could. We didn't have any insurance at that point, which is, that's a first world problem. Most of the world doesn't have insurance anyway, but
the healthcare had been cut off the day we landed. So we knew we just needed to get here.
Yeah.
So we got to the border in BC, and the guy told us, he said, go straight home. Do not stop at Timmy's drive-through. He says, you go straight home, go to your house, and don't come out for 14 days.
That is such a great story. And I love how prayer is the fuel behind it all, of how you guys got here. And what I want to ask you about, because you already touched on this, and it's maybe a difficult thing for everyone to grasp, this idea of we were praying for you guys and you got here, and that is awesome. Not everyone has that same experience, that they are not necessarily stuck. These missionaries are in Africa or Siberia, and they're there. They don't have that next flight out to a safer area, and they are truly entrenched at where they're at. And so I just want to ask, how do you guys, you're way more connected in this part of the ministry world than I am, of how do you see God working in the world right now, even in the midst of this virus? And as I said, you don't have to sugarcoat things and say everything's awesome. You can say how things are tough right now too. I want you to be honest about that, but just so people who are curious of what else do you see God doing in the world around us at this particular time of the year?
Sure. And I will say that I am confident that prayer might have ended differently. God says to pray, and he might have said, I'm going to take the life of one of these two or both of them, or I'm going to cause major problems for them. That happens. We just rest in the fact that he says to pray. You have not because you ask not, but even if he answers no or wait or yes, whatever the answer is, we know he answers, but we rest in the fact that he's sovereign and that he loves us and that we can trust him. So if it turns out like it did for Job, and we never heard the end of the story where God gave him back double, if we just saw it like so many people we know who die, seeing believers who die, martyr deaths or whatever, God still is there, and he still is answering prayer. He's in control. So we rest in that. The outcome was good for us this time. It didn't have to be.
But people have prayed for us just as diligently when the battle was long and hard and the suffering was great. But at the same time, we felt borne along by that support in our suffering in the same way that this time we saw it as really a miracle, truly. But it's always a miracle when God reaches down and gives somebody in suffering the grace to walk through it with peace with joy. Just like it says, I'm going to send trials, and James, I'm going to send you trials, but it's going to be for your good. So that takes prayer as well. So yeah, and that's happening all over the world. I think that's where, and around the world, that's what most of the missionaries, we've had a lot of contact with, some in Africa, some in Europe, we've heard from, and it's been hard in many cases. Especially the ones who, if they get sick, they don't have medical care they have no options. They are there without options. But no, I haven't heard of anybody who said, I wish I had just gone home. I wish I had, not yet.
No. We've had missionary friends in Spain who both came down with COVID-19. They did recover. Some folks that we'd gone to school with who have been there for a lifetime, but they're doing fine. We do know there's going to be a major impact. Our kids in Africa tell us that because people live day to day, and there's no way, social distancing is impossible in a lot of cases, not every case. I mean, it's a mixture of first world and majority world. I mean, there's grass huts and there's high-rise buildings all in the same city.
No water, no electricity.
So these people who are living day to day, once things shut down, it makes it really hard for them to get food, the economy caving. There's going to be significant deprivation. There already is, and it's going to get worse in majority world countries, and even in Russia, where we were in Siberia. A lot of the people there work jobs that aren't government jobs. Government's helping out those places, those people who work for the government. But if you're working a kiosk out there on the roadside, you have nothing, and you can't go to work, and you're just out of money.
There is no welfare in Russia. There is no welfare. So if you have no money and somebody doesn't give you something, you just starve. Or if you have no money, it's just the matter of, like, our missionary, we have one of our missionaries there, and she is a single lady, and she has lupus, and she has chosen to stay and live there. And she's just a fabulous example of comfort is not what the Christian life is about, and especially not the missionary life. And the day that we were leaving, she was ordering in groceries and things that she could, because then she had heard it's coming to Russia. Right. It's on the way, and she was stocking up so that she could help the people in her apartment building when she knew there were a couple of older people, they would not have any way to get anything. So she was getting canned foods and canned meats and toilet paper, which we brought back 18 rolls because we
had empty suitcases. We needed to fill them with something.
People said, you're going to not be able to get toilet paper, so we just brought it with us.
We were going to bring a roll of Russian toilet paper just to show you.
Nice.
I'll go get it. You keep talking.
But I think even closer to home, one of the things that's fun is that right here in Canada, we've had some of our missionaries send stories back that here's God working in the midst of fear. We may not have suffered a lot of deprivation. Some people have gotten sick, and we have lost people, but it's not the huge crisis that's going to be around the world because of financial loss. Now, our missionary in Loon Lake, Saskatchewan, I think you heard this in our prayer meeting, Darryl. He had somebody come to him. A man came to him and said, "I'd like to meet with you. I'm really anxious. I just need to talk.
What if I die?
What if I die?"
God.
And he says, "Well, I can't meet you right now. Can we meet the next day?" So he said, "Sure, I'll come." And he came and he brought his wife and his 2 teenage daughters. And after he'd shared Christ with them. And this man and his wife and his 2 teenage daughters all gave their lives to Christ. And so here's 4 new believers, the result of COVID-19. And, he said, "But I've got a problem now. How am I going to disciple all these people, with all the other ministries already got going?" So it's kind of fun. Great process.
But I think that's happening other places because people are sensing their vulnerability, and all of a sudden but I will share with you, Russian toilet paper has no empty spot in the middle. And it's a fairly substantial paper. So
high fiber.
And we are told that this is translated as important paper or necessary paper.
Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah, so
Oh,
it lasts a long time and it's very compact. And there you go. We have 15 rolls left.
wow, some necessities bringing back. That's awesome.
We wanted to bring them back for gifts for our supporters. Give everybody a roll of Russian toilet paper.
Oh, that's awesome. I need to bring us to a close here really soon, but just awesome hearing your story. And it's interesting doing this right now because I think we're in the middle of the bigger story, and we're not going to hear all of the amazing ways that God has provided for a while. And we're also not going to hear all the heartbreaking stories as well. And God is working in the midst of all of that. And I think that's such an important thing to keep in mind. Just hearing what you guys are saying of different missionaries around who don't have certain safety nets, and there's some tension there in that. Like, we want the perfect ending to the story right now. You guys have a great ending to your story, right. That you're back here in Canada. And we're going to hear more and more of this type of stuff. So for those who are watching this right now, just to give you a heads up, we're going to try to do some more, either some Skype calls like this, or just some calls on as my phone's going off here. Maybe that's a call I should take. Or there's other stories that we're going to hear that we're going to be sharing on our Facebook, YouTube pages and stuff like that. So really quickly, just let us know, how can we be praying for you guys? And I'm going to close this off in a prayer, but is there anything we can pray for you in your ministry right now?
I think just pray that our missionary staff, where they are, would be Jesus, that they'd not be worried about themselves, but how they can care for those who God brings across their path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just close this off in prayer, and I'll let you guys get back to your day. And hopefully those who are watching, you guys can pray throughout the week as well for InterAct Ministries. There's some really cool things happening with your ministry. So let's pray. Father God, thank you so much for Dale and Carol, that they could spend just really graciously giving some of their time to share their story right now. Lord, we pray for InterAct Ministries, that they will be able to use this time, as difficult as it is, that they'll be able to turn moments of crisis into opportunities to share the gospel and to meet the physical needs around them as well. And so may we hear more stories of what Dale just shared, of a family concerned about their eternal future, who gave their lives to Christ. Lord, may more people make that decision. And so we are trusting you in all of this. And so, Lord, we pray all this in your precious name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks,
Right,
Darryl.
well, thank you so much for your time. Hope you guys have a great day.
Thanks, Darryl. You take care. It's been great being with you.
Yep.
And I'm going to try to figure out how to stop this recording. Okay, I'm going to